Hello there. In this video, I'm going to analyze an argument against belief in the supernatural that I call the respect for science argument. Now, I can't quite argue that it succeeds in justifying its conclusion, since it relies on several empirical premises that can't be justified from the armchair, but I do think these premises are plausible, and so I find the argument fairly compelling. I also think that to resist the argument, you're probably going to have to end up accusing our scientific institutions of being systematically defective in certain ways. And so that's why I call it the respect for science argument. Insofar as you see yourself as someone who has respect for our scientific institutions, you should find this argument compelling. Okay, so let's get to the central claim that I'll be defending with the argument. This is the claim that it's not rational to believe in supernatural phenomena. And by this, I mean to include only things that affect the observable world. Okay? Psychic forces, telepathy, telekinesis, powers of prayer, special healing powers, crystals, etc., clairvoyance, tea leaves, astrology patterns, that sort of thing. Okay? Now, I don't mean to include not yet fully understood physical phenomena, such as stuff from quantum mechanics. There might be certain psychological effects of positive thinking. I'm not talking about that. And then you might believe in gods or other entities without causal powers based on purely a priori or philosophical arguments, right? So some people believe in gods for reasons like, look, there's objective morality. Objective morality requires a god, so there's a god, okay? I don't mean to challenge belief in those sorts of things that don't affect the observable world, okay? Only supernatural phenomena that have some impact on the observable world. Now notice, the central claim is not saying that supernatural phenomena don't exist. It's merely saying that it's not rational to believe in them. And by rational, I mean in an epistemic sense, a sense that has to do with knowledge, justification, evidence, reasonable belief, that sort of thing. It might be rational in other ways, like practically rational. There might be beneficial effects of believing in these things. Maybe it's good for your mental health, maybe you have more fun, etc. But it's not rational in the epistemic sense, the sense that has to do with what's reasonable, what's supported by evidence, that sort of thing. All right, so let's get to the argument. I call this the respect for science argument. Premise 1, either supernatural phenomena can be studied or they can't. Premise 2, if they can't, then it's not rational to believe in them. Premise 3, if they can, then either scientists have reported evidence of them, or they're incompetent or corrupt. Premise 4, scientists have not reported evidence of them. Premise 5, scientists are not incompetent. Premise 6, scientists are not corrupt. Conclusion, so it's not rational to believe in supernatural phenomena. Okay, now this argument has a pretty complicated structure, a lot more complicated than we've seen on this channel so far, but it is a valid argument. The premises really do entail this conclusion. So we have to ask ourselves, should we accept these premises? Alright, so I'm going to say a little bit about each premise, but the only premises that I'm really going to spend time defending are the second premise and the third premise. Alright, first, take a look at this first premise. This first premise is just a logical truth, right? Either supernatural phenomena can be studied or they can't. Any statement of the form P or not P is a truth of logic, not the sort of thing we're going to be denying, okay? So, let's think about the second premise, all right? Premise R2 says, if supernatural phenomena can't be studied, then it's not rational to believe in them. All right, well, why should we believe this? Well, there are countless ways supernatural phenomena could work, and without being able to study them, there's no way to rationally believe that they work one way rather than another, right? For instance, prayer for X might make X more likely to occur, or it might make X less likely to occur, or neither, right? A certain tea leaf might mean that something good is going to happen, or that very tea leaf might mean something bad is going to happen, or neither, right? Being born in a certain month M might make having a certain quality Q more likely, or it might make it less likely, or neither. Now here's another way you might support this premise. You might just accept a general epistemic principle, a principle having to do with knowledge, justification, that says something like this. if something can't be studied, then it's not rational to believe in it. All right? That seems like a pretty plausible principle, but I do want to mention one potential problem with it. Okay? Someone might object that, look, the epistemic principle is just too strong, because if we accept it, then we're led to global skepticism. We have to give up on all knowledge whatsoever. Why is that? Well, it might be that all knowledge is ultimately based in certain axioms that themselves can't really be studied. They just need to be accepted, right? These might be axioms of logic or math, or maybe just claims about how things seem to us, our introspective mental states. And so if you could only rationally believe in things that could be studied, that might undermine belief in these basic things, which would then undermine all knowledge whatsoever. But notice, even if this objection succeeds, right, even if we have to end up denying this epistemic principle, we don't have to deny the premise, right? The premise is still plausible. The epistemic principle might be too general, right? There might be, again, basic things that just need to be accepted, but it doesn't seem like supernatural phenomena fall into that category, right? Supernatural phenomena that affect the observable world do not seem like the sort of basic things that must be accepted, such as logical axioms, mathematical axioms, etc., on which all knowledge is based. All right, so I don't think this objection really works, and I think this premise is very plausible. Okay, now let's talk about the third premise. Okay, this premise says if supernatural phenomena can be studied, then either scientists have reported evidence of them, or they're incompetent or corrupt. All right. Now, this premise shouldn't be immediately plausible just by looking at it. It's a pretty complicated claim. So I'm actually going to present another argument for this premise. All right. So here we have premise A1. If supernatural phenomena can be studied, then scientists have tried to study them. Premise A2. If scientists have tried to study them, then they've either succeeded in finding evidence of them or they've failed. Premise A3. If scientists have failed, then they're incompetent. Premise A4, if scientists have succeeded, then they've either reported evidence of them or they're corrupt. Conclusion, so if supernatural phenomena can be studied, then scientists have either reported evidence of them or they're incompetent or corrupt. Okay, so let's take a look at each premise. The first premise is just saying, look, if there's something that can be studied, something that affects the observable world, then scientists are going to try to study them. Okay. Now, the second premise is just more or less true by definition. If you try to do something, then you either succeed or you fail, right? You either succeed because you do the thing that you tried to do, or you fail because you don't do the thing that you tried to do. Now, you might say that, look, scientists have tried and they haven't succeeded yet, but that doesn't mean they've failed. Well, we're just going to count that as so far failing, right? If you're trying to do something and so far you haven't succeeded, then you failed, at least so far, right? The third premise says if scientists have failed, then they're incompetent, okay? Now, I don't just mean individual scientists are incompetent. I mean scientists as a whole, as an institution, by and large, are incompetent. If they've tried to study these things and they've failed to find any evidence of them, then they are, by and large, incompetent. Okay? Now, the fourth premise says if scientists have succeeded in finding evidence of them, then they've either reported this evidence or they're corrupt. Right? In other words, they have the evidence, their experiments have succeeded, then either they're going to report on this evidence, publish journal articles about it, or they are by and large corrupt, right? They are hiding it for some nefarious reason. So how might you challenge some of these premises? Well, you might challenge the first one by saying, well, scientists have just chosen not to study these things, okay? Now, I don't think this is that plausible. Again, these are things that affect the observable world, and they can be studied. So it seems like scientists are going to study such things. You can't really deny the second premise. It's pretty much true by definition, by the definition of tried and succeed and failed. If you try to do something, then by definition, you either succeed or you fail. You could deny the third premise. You could say they haven't succeeded, but that's only because they've gotten super unlucky. They're not incompetent, but every time they've tried, their measuring devices have just failed them, and that's not their fault. All right? This is certainly possible. It just seems super unlikely, super implausible. And then finally, you could deny the fourth reason. You could say, yes, they've succeeded in finding evidence of them, and they haven't reported it, but that's not because they're corrupt. Instead, they have a very good reason for not doing so, right? Maybe there's a god who came to the scientists and said, good job, scientists. You've succeeded in finding evidence of all the supernatural forces I've planted in the world. You're certainly not incompetent, nor are you corrupt. But if you report on these findings, I'm going to wreak havoc on this universe, right? Maybe scientists, had a big meeting and said, look, let's not publish any findings about this supernatural phenomena so that this god won't wreak havoc. Certainly possible, but seems super implausible, super unlikely. So I think the ways to deny this premise are very implausible, okay? So I think this premise R3, is super plausible. All right, so let's look back at the argument as a whole, okay? We've already said we're not going to be challenging the first premise. It's the truth of logic. I've defended the second premise. I've defended the third premise. So let's look at the fourth through sixth premise. Now, the fourth premise just says scientists have not reported evidence of them, right? Now, I could be wrong about this. I don't keep up to date on the latest science. But if scientists have found evidence of, telekinesis, tea leaves, astrology patterns, that sort of thing, I would have thought it would have come across my Facebook feed at some point. Now, this could be a problem with my Facebook feed, or maybe there's a media conspiracy trying to, keep it quiet. But I think it's a pretty plausible premise that scientists have not reported finding evidence of these things. And so that brings us to the fifth and sixth premise. Now remember, these are claiming not just that individual scientists aren't incompetent or corrupt. There might be some individual scientists that are incompetent or corrupt. There might even be patterns of incompetence or corruption on a larger scale. But what it's saying is that scientists as a whole, by and large, for the most part, are not incompetent, nor are they corrupt. Okay? And so that's why I call this the respect for science argument. I think in order to resist this conclusion, in order to deny that it's not rational to believe in supernatural phenomena, you're going to have to end up denying either the fifth premise or the sixth premise. Okay? So you're going to have to end up implicitly accusing our scientific institutions of being defective in one of these ways. You're going to have to say scientists on the whole either are incompetent or they are corrupt. All right? So again, that might be easy to do for some of you if you already believe in certain conspiracies, that sort of thing. But if you're the sort of person that sees yourself as having respect for our institutions of science, then I think you're going to find these premises pretty plausible. And so I think you should be led to find this conclusion to be pretty plausible. All right? But if you think you can challenge this argument in some way and resist the conclusion, then I wish you good fortune in the culture wars to come. And now it begins.